50% of people who ever tear their ACL, only half of them will ever make it back to their previous level of sports performance. So if you're a college athlete, only half of you are going to play college again. Of that half, another half re-tear or injure their other leg within 2 years. So we have 1 in 4, not failure rate, success rate, hyper-competitive world where we miss the base, where kids used to play, they used to play multiple sports, they used to do all of these different things, so that by the time they went and specialized, they had such a higher base of movement skill. Getting more sleep will make you smarter, more athletic, prettier, like more attractive. And so the opposite is also true. Like getting less sleep will make you dumber, more injured, uglier. I don't know if we could have any more research on it.
What is the mental side of injury recovery?
The first things that I do with my athletes, and one of the things that I think very few other people do, is
what do you tell yourself when you first get injured? I think that's a very important component for athletes and anyone who gets injured.
Yeah, so I had a little snowboarding fall, landed on my shoulder, like separated the joint just like a little bit. First 24 hours, I kind of try not to, rather than like, even if you think about just like a plane trying to fly a long distance and stuff like that, if you're constantly all over the place, like you're going to be all over the map, and just recognizing, okay, you're over here, let's just start to come back. And just being a little bit more like accepting, a little bit more tolerant, and not thinking I have to kind of uproot and change my entire life.
All right. Welcome to episode 2 of the Progress Guarantee podcast, where we interview interesting people about their expertise, learn how they make progress, and discover the space of how careers are changing. My guest is Zak Woodward. Did I get your last name correct? I feel like I did.
Yes, sir.
All right. And he's one of the top online fitness coaches for soccer. I say football. Ben Patrick, the creator of the famous ATG Ask the Grass system or knees over toes system, said that Zak is a freak athlete, the top coach for ATG soccer, and one of the best for healing ACL injuries. Zak is the host of the Athletic Transformation Project podcast, ATPP, and definitely give it a listen. And in today's conversation, I hope you discover better ways to become more athletic, especially if you're a desk warrior like myself. Zak, excited to have you on the show.
Thanks for being here, man. Looking forward to it.
Fantastic. So before we jump in, I wanted to state that I'm not here to debate. I'm here to absorb. Okay, I have, I think in my own fitness journey, just trying to explore as many systems as possible. So, but I've seen you debate different folks. So I kind of want to get into that as well. I think that's always interesting. So it'll be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a little bit of that Bruce Lee of, always happy to kind of learn and explore and kind of take the stuff that sticks and leave the stuff that's that doesn't. I've been fairly nice to people in debates so far. So even if we did, it'll be okay.
Cool. So what is your current approach to fitness and athleticism, and what is the ATG Protocol?
So the ATG Protocol, it's really a system of strength training that's designed to fill in the gaps or kind of build a foundation for people. So I almost think of it as being a little bit more foundational than traditional strength training. It can help enhance everything that we're doing with regular strength training, with speed training, with all of these different things. It's an idea of, one of the big key concepts is an idea called structural balance, where we want to make sure that the body is balanced. We have certain ratios of strength from different muscle groups to different joints and things like that. And one of the things that we see in the way that people train is that we will kind of build strength disproportionately. We'll hit some areas very, very hard, other areas not so much. We'll train maybe more of like the muscular skeletal system more than we will the joints and tendons and things like that. And so over time, these kind of discrepancies, these imbalances lead to either kind of plateaus in performance or also injuries as well. And so we just are taking a look at the body and saying, look, if we never weight trained, if we never touch the body, it's built up in these specific proportions. It develops this kind of way. And so we want to make sure that if we're going to try and enhance that, we do that systematically. We're not kind of we're not ignoring pieces, because that's where we kind of run into issues, is when we're doing some things, but not the other. So that's where we just kind of look at it. It really as that foundation of, this is the kind of the basic expectations or standards you need to be able to get to, that then everything else you build on top of it will be more successful.
Interesting. And when you first discovered ATG, how much of that system did you actually cover with your own training, with your own athleticism, let's say?
Yeah, very, very little. I came from more of a traditional like strength and conditioning background, like kind of university educated, bachelor's, master's degree in kinesiology, all of that good stuff. I've spent time in 3 different collegiate weight rooms. I've coached Division I national champions. Like that was my original kind of background. And from that experience, both coaching and then also as an athlete, I was a college athlete, played soccer, and like really got into the strength training side of things early to try and enhance my own performance, to try and get that bigger, faster, stronger, become a better athlete. And the issue that I ran into, that it seems like a lot of people in this space run into, is I got the acronym or the moniker is like bigger, faster, stronger. That's the goal that we try and get for a lot of people. And what it ends up becoming is bigger, stronger, slower. That's like a very common just kind of way as we get into this more of like kind of bodybuilding, powerlifting centric, like that's where some of this like traditional strength and conditioning route comes from. And so that was kind of the experience that I had as well. Became bigger, became stronger, but not necessarily more athletic in the ways that I'd hoped. And then getting into the coaching space, just started to see some of the gaps that were going on, that some of the things that we were just overlooking, that we were missing in there. So that's where I started looking for just different approaches, people that were doing different things, different ways of looking at this training concept. And so came across Ben fairly early in like late 2018, early 2019, before he'd kind of blown up on social media, when he still had his gym in Clearwater, Florida, that he was training people out of in person. And so he was actually very gracious enough. I was just some kid on the internet that DM'd him, was like, yo, I love your stuff. Could I come like hang out for the day, see what you're doing? And like, he'd never met me before or anything like that. And was very gracious enough to like invite me out. So drove across the state to go hang out there, and getting into the gym and seeing like what was actually being done, like the results that these guys were getting, like with this himself, his own story is outrageous. Like his athletes, like there was just all of these guys that were formerly broken guys. Like, oh, you talk to anyone in the gym, like, I had an ACL, this guy had an MCL, this guy had a meniscus, I had knee pain for 12 years, I'd given up on basketball. And then all of these guys are just throwing, it's looking like a dunk show in there. All of these guys are just throwing down these crazy dunks, and it's kind of eye-opening. It's like, oh, like there's something to this for sure. And so then as I got into that myself, started applying it with myself, had a very big impact on my own athletic ability. So my freshman year as like an actual college athlete, right? Playing soccer, I got timed as running a 5.2 40-yard dash. Which for people outside the States that aren't familiar with 40 times, it's not something to write home about. I'll put it like that. It's not the quickest time in the world. And getting into more of this side of things, like I've run in the 4.6s, the 4.5s, like, and this is 5 years past my like athletic career, athletic prime, like that sort of thing. So it's had a very powerful athletic impact on me personally. And then as I've started to apply that with my athletes and my coaching business, working independently now, getting out of the strength and conditioning space, it's had a very profound impact on those guys as well. So that's the kind of the story of how I got involved, like why I've been using it. At the end of the day, for me, what I'm the most interested in is results. Like who's getting the actual transformations, the results that you're looking for, and then try and dig into some of the methods of why that may be. And that's what attracted to me to Ben into that approach in the first place, of like literally walking in the gym, like, something's going on here. And so like that results-based approach, and then having those results myself with my own abilities and with my athletes, that's what's kind of led me to make this a cornerstone of my philosophy up to now.
Very cool. How long did it take you to adopt that system? Because oftentimes, for instance, like I was a trainer myself, so you see a system, you have your own grounding, you know what works for you, but what was that length of time that it took you to be like, this really is working?
So I'd say I probably dove into it kind of all in fairly early, just to like give it an honest go. That is one of the things too. It's like a try, and if you see something new or something that you're going to try, like do it verbatim for a period of time before you start trying to mix in your own stuff. And so that initial period, when he was still like a little bit more like kind of underground and having a little bit different style of programming that he does now, went into that very hard. And then over time, just started to kind of tinker and explore with stuff and things like that, add in little variations, add in some of the other things, my other influences and things like that. But I'd say I went into it pretty quickly just to give it a go, see what would happen. And it was pretty decent.
Cool. What was it like training with him early on? I know he's like super rock star now, but what was it like seeing him before he became Ben? Patrick?
It was crazy. It was crazy. It's cool because he's one of, I would say, the very few people in this entire space, like especially in the, let's say, like the fitness, like counterculture, slightly outside the mainstream. There's tons of people in this space promoting their own theories, philosophies, training systems, all of these different things. But he's one of the only and definitely the best that I've seen at actually living the system himself. Of like being able to get results that it's like, it's just hard to deny, of like seeing the transformation that he's had, the athletic ability that he has, the fact that he's continuing to 8, 9, 10 years in, still perform higher, still jump higher in his early 30s with a couple of kids and still being able to improve his performance using that stuff. Like there's tons of systems and people out there who, I would say, even in theory, like a lot of their stuff makes a ton of sense, maybe even makes more like logical sense just from like a theoretical or philosophical point of view than some of the ATG stuff. But I haven't seen people that live it to the same degree, that get the same results either with themselves or with their athletes. Not to say that other people aren't getting good results, but to the same degree. And so he was someone that really lived it. The passion was something that you could really kind of see very early on for what he was doing. It's just the real like kind of commitment to the goal that he had, and then the embodiment of that system as a way that's helped him spread it undeniably. It's like, that's something of when you can see somebody like dunk and do the splits. It's one of those things that it's very, it's undeniable in that sense. And so that was probably the biggest thing of like the intensity of training, the quality of training, just the focus and the expectation on execution and things like that. Those were some of the biggest things, and just that environment, that culture when you actually get in it versus seeing it online. Those were some of the biggest things. And I think one of the things that I benefited from getting in there early on.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, congrats on the shout out from him, by the way, because as I've observed you over the years, I would put you in that category of freak athlete. And in prepping for this interview, I was looking at your running form. I had explored I didn't really explore it, but the GOAT, greatest of all time athletes movement. And I see, how you sort of align or not align there on certain trains of thought. But I was just watching your form and it looked perfect. It looked powerful. You were rebounding and I was like, oh, this is cool. What were some of the challenges that you had adopting the ATG system? In addition, what are some common mistakes you see people make when they try to adopt this protocol?
Yeah, the shout out was definitely something that was very special. I very much appreciated that. He's a good dude, and the go to stuff that's interesting too. I've actually been to their facility and trained with them as well, so I've got some. That was also kind of early on, so I know their philosophy is a little bit different now, but I've seen at least a decent amount of that, at least from what it used to be. In terms of application, the hardest thing that I would say is, and it's getting better now, is the acceptance piece. So like back when I was doing stuff when I wasn't working independently, when I was working at like the strength and conditioning settings, and when I was working in the kind of private sports performance settings, but under the roof or under the umbrella of kind of different people, where they had a little bit like you had to kind of appease, or you didn't have free reign basically. Yes. And not that it wanted to just kind of throw everything that you've always done previously out and just kind of change everything and do this whole new system. But especially it was again earlier in those days for him as well, the stuff that we were doing was looked on with a lot more skepticism. And so it was just the ability to even do that, be allowed to do that, like get away. You had to kind of like sneak it in when you could. That was probably the biggest challenge. And what was the second part of that question?
What are some common mistakes you see people make when they actually try, because everyone will see knees over toes and like, let me go try this thing out. And I think there's value in coaching. That's what I've learned.
Yeah, for sure. And so I think that's probably the biggest mistake that I would see is simply the execution of just like the standard that gets held to in his own training and people in the gym versus what people will see online. Especially maybe a few years ago when he was promoting like the standards that he has a little bit more, people would be very quick to like, okay, these are the standards, this body weight, and they would kind of chase that and try and knock that out just as quickly as they could. And maybe they could get to like close to the weights and stuff, but the intent to detail, the quality and the execution of that was maybe not as high. And so they're like, look, I can do all of these and I'm still not jumping the way that Ben is. Like this stuff doesn't work, everything like that. And it's more of trying to chase what's the intent behind each exercise? What are we trying to get out of each one? And so that would probably be a big thing of the way that we do things. What we're trying to get out of it is we're doing all these exercises to get an adaptation. So like, let's say I'm trying to squat my body weight on a slant board or something for X number of reps. Like, it's cool to be able to do that, but that's not the end goal, right? I want to be the person that can squat that kind of weight because I want the adaptation that gives me. So people will be like, if I can do this weight, no matter how that I do it, and like, no matter what intent I'm putting behind it, I'll get that goal, that achievement, that outcome on the back end, that result, that transformation. And it's not necessarily the case. It's much more of, can I be the person that could do that standard? Can I make that look easy? Could I do that cold without a warm up? Like really mastery of these specific movements. One of the really unique things about the ATG methodology, coming back to that structural balance piece, is the exercise selection itself. So it's a very unique set of exercises, set of movements that have very specific adaptations that we're trying to get out of them. And so really honing in on the execution of that to maybe a greater degree when we live in more of a kind of CrossFit world of its completion, rather than the way, like for time, like just more and more faster, rather than the way that is being done. That's the biggest thing that I've seen kind of make it the biggest mistake that I see people that are looking in and trying to copy it from the outside. Like, it's subtle, but it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, I can second that. I think I was trying his stuff before I, saw that you were a big proponent of it. And then I had a training session with you, and I saw all of the little fine pointers that you were pushing me through on how much more depth and range to each exercise that they had, and probably how much more painful it could be with just little simple tweaks. So I do recommend to people, if you are trying the ATG system, like, do a coaching session with someone who's a certified coach in it. I think it'll pay dividends, because now it's given me a new reference point in my mind. Even when I continue to try things on my own, I'm like, I think there's a fine point that I'm missing. I need to probably go call Zak, that I never end up calling you until now. You mentioned something about cold without a warm up. And I saw you do something in Indonesia where you did some cold baths before you went running. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So that was just that was a little different. That was just a little experiment there for fun. But yeah, that was the idea with that. We hopped in the ice bath, but for a very short period of time. So not like the 3 to 5 minutes that people will normally do. I think it was more like 60 seconds, maybe something like that, just to get that like kind of CNS stimulus. You first jump in, everything like is that big kind of wake up, and then jump out before we like physically got cold to try and sprint. So that was just kind of just messing around, seeing what that was like. But the idea of being able to perform without a warm up is something that I very much like. People are talking about more and more these days as well. And it's not to say that warm ups are bad and you shouldn't do them in training, like it will enhance your performance. But the idea is that if you need to spend 20 minutes warming up, stretching, foam rolling, doing whatever it is before you can go and do something powerful or something athletic, maybe not hit like your absolute peak in terms of just numbers on a jump or on a sprint, but you should be able to perform that way. You should be able to roll out. I think even Louis Simmons, like 20, 30 years ago, had a quote that you should be able to go and like bang pots and pans in the bedroom of one of his like wide receivers, and he should be able to get up and go run a mile, like just like that. And so that quality goes back to that attributes idea that we were talking about with the standards and things like that. Like the standards aren't the goal. Being the person who can do the standards is the goal. And that's where that idea comes in as well. Just being able to show up and perform. Like that's something that's, I think is valuable from a performance standpoint, from an athletic skill standpoint, of like, if you're a basketball player, can you just roll up to an LA Fitness and can you perform? Or do you need to have your whole pregame ritual with the headphones and doing whatever it is? Like, it's a more powerful athlete, it's a more powerful individual that can show up and do that compared to somebody who needs all of those things. That's the biggest thing. It's not that these are bad and you don't want to use those to perform at your best, but if you need those, then it's a crutch. And that's just the idea behind that.
Interesting. You mentioned adaptation a lot. How do you view adaptation? Because it seems like you're viewing it across these different realms. This is one factor, like rollout. Can I test you cold? Any other feature dimensions that you see around adaptation?
Adaptation is really like the idea behind it is just like that's everything that we're going for in the gym, in training in general. Everything is about the adaptation. And so we've gotten a little bit like with the advent of sports science and everything like that, a little bit myopic, where to a certain point, the gym has become the end goal. And like we're looking to measure performance in the gym when we really need to remember, like, unless we're coming from like an Olympic weightlifting, a bodybuilding, which is where also like Olympic weightlifting in particular, like all the Russian stuff, that's where a lot of our science and education comes from. So it's easy to understand why. But like that was the actual metric they were performing for. Where for 99% of us, like whether we're athletes or not, whether we're just training for general life, whether we're training to sprint faster, whether we're training to be better athletes, the gym is simply a tool to enhance everything else out here. So the gym and the training stuff, that is what I would consider like the stimulus. We are trying to stimulate the body in some kind of way to get an adaptation where I'm better on the other end. So like that's just trying to basically remember what the end goal is, like what we're actually training for, because it's very easy to get sucked into of just chasing numbers in the gym, like, and that becomes the performance in and of itself. And just we can lose sight sometimes of what we're actually doing this for. When I keep saying that's what I mean. That's the mindset. That's the philosophy. Like we're doing this to be better outside of here. If you're getting better in here and not out there, we're doing something wrong. And yes, that's one of the common things. And one of the early criticisms that I have of some of like the strength and conditioning space is best athletes in the gym, little playing time on the field. Best athletes on the field, mediocre in the gym. And so if that's the case, like there's a disconnect, like whatever we're doing in here isn't having as much of a translation or as much of a result as we want to see out there, or our measures, like what we're measuring and comparing in here is not translating as much to everything that we're doing out on the field. And so just always having that as kind of the North Star, what we're looking towards the most, is something that I think can be helpful for people to keep in the back of their mind.
Makes sense. Talking about athleticism, there are many different, I think, dimensions to athleticism. So if you look at Usain Bolt, his function is to go sort of in a straight line. We look at Messi has to go many different lines, many different speeds. Can you talk about how athleticism is sort of that definition is different across different sports, and maybe what does athleticism mean for a desk warrior, like the traditional person who sits their ass on a chair 8 hours a day, like myself?
Well, I would think that from that sense, athleticism is task specific. So I don't even say sport specific, but it's your ability to complete whatever task you want to complete. So do you want to run a 5K? Do you want to run 100 meters? Do you want to be a rock climber? But if we were going to kind of zoom out a little bit, because that has a skill component to it. So I want to kind of separate those two just a little bit. If I would think about athleticism, I think about that more as like raw ability to run, jump, change direction, things like that. Like I think about like an NFL combine. Like that is athleticism. That's just pure like meat factory, for lack of a better term. Like it is your ability to perform at whatever kind of markers we're looking at. Can you be fast, powerful? Do you have endurance? Like those are the markers of athleticism. And then as that translates into skill is your ability to complete a task. So like that's more of like the neuromuscular side of things, or your, again, skill development side of things. I can be more athletic than a rock climber, but not climb as well as them because I don't have the actual like skill in that same with like the Messi thing. It's your ability to like kind of perceive space, make decisions, all of that sort of thing. And you could say you could lump that into athleticism as well. And maybe you should. I think it's just a little bit easier to define them kind of in those camps. And at least when people say athleticism, that's more of what they mean, versus the ability to problem solve. Essentially, that's kind of what people talk about, like jujitsu and that sort of thing. That idea of like human chess and like solving problems and being able to execute a skill under duress or under these different things. Those are the two kind of buckets that I would look at when like what you need to perform as an athlete. You need this but you also need this. Like you need the ability to actually physically move, run, do all of these different things, but you also need the highest degree possible of skill, refinement, nuance in your chosen task. But I leave that out. I put that separate because tasks are going to be so different. You could be a climber, you could be a footballer, you could be a sprinter. And so like the perception and skill base needed for that is different. But that ability to solve problems is something is universal, just what problems you're trying to solve.
Makes sense. How many different sports do you dabble in? I think you do snowboarding. I'm curious actually.
Yeah. I don't think I've counted them all before. Soccer, football is the biggest one for sure. I also have a decent little training experience in like kind of combat stuff, particularly like Muay Thai. So like after I left Indo, I actually did a month in Thailand at Tiger Muay Thai.
Okay.
Cool. Just get my ass kicked by a bunch of 5-foot dudes for a month. That was a good time. And then kind of surfing, snowboarding are ones that I would consider myself more of a dabbler. Snowboarding, we got a little bit more experience. Surfing, I'm still trying to figure out. That one's a little bit harder. Those are probably the big ones. I can crush a game of spike ball when needed, but that's more of a kind of recreational
one. No tennis, any racket sports, climbing.
I've played them from time to time, but not with any consistency enough to consider that something that I'd put in my wheelhouse.
Makes sense. So, we've discussed the structural imbalance mindset about when you go to train, you should actively try to get rid of those things to a degree, or at least measure them and be aware of them. There's this notion of adaptation. What else is sort of missing from the current bodybuilding protocol for both recreational and practicing athletes? Because I do think that style of training affects those two populations quite differently. I feel like the athletes have much more exposure to, well, I don't know. Do regular athletes have much more exposure to injury, or does the couch potato recreational athlete have more exposure to injury?
Yeah, like the weekend warrior. I have to check the stats on that. I would say they're probably not amazing in either camp at this point. But both have a little bit going on, but I'd say it's a coin toss on who's worse. In terms of just limitations of more of that kind of bodybuilding style approach, I'd say some of the biggest ones are movement quality or like movement capacity, like ability to move. Like it's very static and muscular focused, of like, can you looking good without performance, essentially, in a nutshell. But even just like basic qualities like flexibility, range of motion, things like that are typically kind of afterthoughts in that style of training. And then also like the joint tendon side of things would probably be the biggest one to kind of round that out. So that range of motion, flexibility piece, joint tendon side of things, and then even just movement quality, elasticity, like ability to run, be fluid, be mildly athletic. Those are I'd say the biggest things if you take that too far. And it's not to say that's something that has no value in any sense to either of those camps. Like body composition is something that's very important for every sport, and especially even more so like the weekend warrior. So if you're like 20 pounds overweight, 30 pounds overweight and talking about how that's not functional, it's like, you've kind of missed the boat a little bit either, like that expression of like kind of fat don't fly, right? So it's not that we can never touch a weight and bicep curls are going to make you spontaneously combust. It's that they're exclusive kind of focus on that style of training at the expense of everything else. That's where it starts to become more detrimental, because there is almost now that like kind of counterculture now of all like, bodybuilding's evil, strength is terrible, everything in the gym is bad. And it's like, well, let's maybe pump the brakes a little bit. Like there are still plenty of good qualities to it. Most notably being that strength and body composition and like hormone profile, all of those benefits that you get from that style of training, just recognizing that it's a piece of the puzzle, and the people in that space who make it their own profession obviously take it much, much farther. And that's not our goal, but that doesn't mean that we can't take the valuable pieces of that and apply that to whatever our goal is.
What's your thoughts on, you are known as you're shouted out by Ben as one of the top people for repairing ACL injuries or ACL recovery post-surgery, and I guess probably pre-injury or pre-surgery, I imagine. Why is that injury so common in sports players, and what can people do to prevent it?
Yeah. The unfortunate thing with that, and with most common like strength and conditioning questions in general, is the answer to everything is it depends.
It depends.
And so I would also say that I'd say it's injuries in general that are becoming more systemic. The ACL we're seeing more of for sure, but it's not the only one. And I'd say it depends because it's a combination of things.
Okay.
I think that there's the poor lifestyle, poor development from a athletic or even sports skill standpoint, and a greater frequency and intensity. Those are probably the biggest ones. So in terms of lifestyle, we eat worse, we sleep worse, we're distracted more, like it's like kind of the technologies and every kind of marker of just basic physiology. Like we can look around at rates of obesity, all these different things. Like systemically, that's getting worse. So that's going to make us more susceptible to getting hurt. From a just human being, athletic, motor learning, even skill development side of things, I'd say that's also getting worse as well. We have no recess for kids. We have no multi-sport athletes anymore. There's even like in the development that we have now, especially here in the US, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, but like it's not fun. It's not play. And it's honestly not even skill development anymore. It's like everyone cares about the U10 championship of the city. You've got the kind of moms and dads like losing their shit on the side of like a U8 soccer game. Like, so there's no focus on just like being a kid or even just developing. Like it's all about this like hyper competitive where you're fixed into a position. Like if you're a center back at 8 years old, these days you're going to be a center back at 18, like, and you're never going to explore another position. And so it's this hyper specialized, hyper competitive world where we miss the base where kids used to play. They used to play multiple sports. They used to do all of these different things so that by the time they went and specialized, they had such a higher just base of movement skill. They just have a higher library, higher like access to different qualities, different attributes. And then within that, all of these sports are now, not only are they hyper competitive, but it's also 365. There's no off season. You're not playing a different sport. And so like by the time you're 12, you've got 5 years of hardcore repetitive soccer, like under your belt. And so all of those just combine to like wear kids down and then be less resistant to all of the injury development that we have. And then and that trickles up because it's interesting because you see it at the highest level, but you also see it at the youth level of like NBA, Premier League, NFL, more injuries than ever before. U10, U12, U14, same thing. And so that's why to me, it's more of this like systemic thing. And then at the highest level, I would even say that some of the training stuff's not great that we're doing. Like on top of all of this, like kind of hyper competitive, like year round schedule, like a lot of the training work that we're doing from our profession, like, I don't know, if you see some of the videos coming out of like Barcelona and Real Madrid of like the strength training that they're doing, it's like, Jesus Christ, like what are we doing? Like, it's just so far from just like basic common sense stuff. And so yeah, just at the highest level, like these guys are getting training that's not always, but in a lot of like in a lot of circumstances, just like garbage on top of the poor lifestyle and everything like that, the higher intensity. And so I think all of that contributes to what you're seeing at that level as well.
Mm-hmm. I heard you had an interesting conversation. I forget the gentleman's name, but you're talking a lot about sleep. And I hadn't necessarily paid attention to sleep and how that sort of plays into injury, because it seems like it's a very subtle thing that probably accumulates over time. How many of the athletes, and this is a general theme I think in this interview, is a lot of people focus on the research, but what I've found, and I think Ben and yourself are good candidates of this, is that in your lab with your clients, like you're testing and you're seeing things and you're pushing the boundaries of academic knowledge into real world knowledge. Out of the athletes that you work with that have been injured, how many of them had maybe not so good sleep habits? Just curious, actually.
I'd say all of them. I mean, you could go walk into a high school these days, get the entire high school in the auditorium, ask them, how many of you consistently get quality sleep, 7 to 8 hours in bed before 10:30, and you do that consistently? You're going to get what, 3 hands in a class? I'll give you $100 if you could find more than like a 2% like success rate. You know what I mean? Like it's so it's so systemic, we don't even think about it anymore. It's just normal to have terrible sleep hygiene, terrible consistency with it. And it's one of those things that we've now almost kind of gotten to the point of just being numb to, like hearing about it. Everyone's like, yeah, I gotta sleep. It's so common, we don't even see it. It's like the kind of fish being in water of like, do they, like, you don't actually know just because it's your environment kind of thing. And it's also just one of those boring things that sleep better. Like, yeah, okay. Like, it's not sexy. It's not, it's a hard sell. And even just like a high school kid's lifestyle is not set up for that as well. Like, you have to be in class at 7:30 in the morning, like 5 days a week. And so like the buses are coming by in my neighborhood at 5:30, 6 in the morning for these kids that are in their window where they need more sleep than any other time in their life. And they're like developing, growing puberty. And so a lot of it's not even their fault. But yeah, if you got to be up at 5 in the morning, like, unless these kids are going to bed at 10, which we know they're not, then they're going to be really, really behind in that. And there's tons of research on the amount of the direct correlation between lack of sleep and not just increased injury risk, but poor performance across any marker you want to look at: cognitive performance, physical performance, speed, power, IQ, like everything. Like, literally, like, getting more sleep will make you smarter, more athletic, prettier, like more attractive. Like, and so the opposite is also true. Like, getting less sleep will make you dumber, more injured, uglier. Like, we have like, I don't know if we could have any more research on it. And so it's not a knowledge thing. It's an application thing. It's like a buy-in, like actually getting these guys to understand and to value that. And I mean, also like from our end, like the top down side of things, how many coaches in the sports world or in the strength and conditioning world, like actually care, versus more of just like you give it like the token 2 cents of like, oh yeah, get some good sleep. But like, how many of them actually like do that themselves? How many of that actually like kind of follow up with that? And so it's, until we value it, they're not going to, for sure.
When it comes to injury, there's a big part of it that's mental. So I've had some injuries that, for whatever reason, when I get injured, it tends to be like these multi-year things that I'm working through. But for me, it's been a process of deep introspection. So for instance, like with my most recent ankle injury, like now I've explored so much depth between the hips and understanding, my ankle pain actually comes from, it's rooted in the hips. And then there's that symbiotic relationship. Can you talk about the mentality of, or what is the mental side of injury recovery? Because there's a big fear component, especially when we go play sports, versus like, I guess weightlifting is a sport. You hurt your back with a huge squat, like that's pretty scary too.
Yeah, 100%. I'm glad that you asked that, because I feel like it's just as important as the physical side and talked about significantly less. For me, I had a similar experience. My one kind of big injury that got me started with this is I broke my ankle going into my freshman year of college, like trying to be a college athlete. Yeah, and I had an interesting recovery too. It was kind of rough. But surgery, all of that good stuff. And like, it took me about a year to like physically come back, be good to go. It took me at least another year on top of that before I actually felt like myself. And so that was one of the things, like I could play physically, but I didn't feel sharp. I didn't feel ready. I wasn't confident. Like, I literally just didn't feel like myself again. And that's a huge thing that I think people don't talk about. One of the first things that I do with my athletes, and one of the things that I think very few other people do, is from when they come in, whether it's kind of remote, in person, whatever it is, like trying to set the expectation of, I have 2 goals for you. I don't care how long it takes, but I want us physically to come back better than we were previously. We need to be stronger, more athletic than we were previously. If we got injured at our previous 100%, especially if that was a non-contact injury, that needs to be our minimum threshold, our baseline that we should look to exceed if we are going to come back and be able to do that safely, confidently, like actually believe in ourselves again. It just seems like common sense to me. And I'll get into in a second, but like, that's one of my biggest issues with the PT medical world, is that's not the standard. I'll talk about that in a second, but that is not the expectation. And so that's a huge piece. One, it's just like physically, like a lot of the times your lack of confidence comes from, you're not ready. Like physically you don't feel the same. You feel like you're not as strong. And your body's smart, your brain is smart, you're intuitive. You can just tell that you're not the same that you were before. And so you have that kind of neurological, you have that fear, you have that neurological handbrake going on there. And so when we can remove that, when we can get you stronger, so much of that will just click into place. They go and play, they're like, ooh, yeah. Like and so that's where I think the majority of it comes from. And then also getting them back to the other side of the coin is I want you physically here, but I also want you, we'll talk about from the beginning, mentally to not have to worry about this again. To be able to we're not done until you can go and play. And some of the favorite things I'll have people say is I played for the first time last night and I didn't think about my knee, or I forgot about it, or I had this hard cut and it felt really good, or I got tackled hard and my knee felt fine and I popped right back up. And that's when okay, that's when you're good. Even more than the stuff that we're going to do in the gym of wanting you to be able to perform certain things. When I hear that, I'm like, okay, now we're where we want to be. And so part of that as well is drip feeding the sport performance and the return to sport stuff more the same way that we do in the gym. Mm-hmm. So when we're doing the rehab stuff in the gym, we have ways to just the smallest incremental progressions with everything we do. We can break it down into 100 different layers, 1,000 different levels. And with the return to sports stuff, a lot of times it's much bigger jumps. It's not broken down that same way. You get cleared to jog, you get cleared to train, you get cleared to play. And it's there's no real kind of oversight. It's all right, good luck. And you just so no wonder they're skittish. And so with footballers, I have a very specific return to sport protocol. You can do it for any sport, but that's my obviously kind of background and who I work with the most, but where we break down the game into different pieces, just like we do in the gym. So can you just go do some technical stuff purely on your own? Nobody else around, just go out there with the ball, very light, very low energy, move around, some cone drill, whatever it is. Can you go out with a partner? Can we start to pass a ball a little stuff that's a little bit more dynamic, open that up, a little bit longer range, shoot a little bit, whatever you want to do. Can we then go into rondos? So it's live, but not really. It's a little bit smaller still. Can we then go into possession, into small-sided, keeping everything within the full-sided within the team, full-sided within another team? So just having those little steps, each time you do one, you get that little win, that little win, that little win. And the jump from one to the next is so much more manageable that you're not overwhelmed of ooh, I don't know. Honestly, most of my athletes, they're doing this stuff without me. I find out about it the next day. They're like, hey, I played yesterday. I'm like, okay. How did it feel? Oh, pretty good. Okay, cool. So I actually will lean on them and rely on them a lot of times to lead that even more than I do. Just because again, you have an intuitive sense of when you feel ready. And that I trust that feeling and I trust them to lead that. I'm still there to kind of direct and pull and stuff like that, but I'll lean on them a little bit more and give them that little confidence of their push if they need. And I think that's just so different from the standard that is set the majority of time. So the threshold to get cleared from traditional physical therapy and everything like that is 80 to 95% of your non-injured leg. If we can get your injured leg to 85 to 90% or 95% of your non-injured leg, you're good to go on a couple of different strength tests, hop tests, whatever it is. And even just the efficacy or the reliability of those tests, I'm not a huge fan of either. But that's wild to me. You're worse off than you were when you got hurt, and we're going to send you back out and say you're good to go. And not only that, most of the time they really haven't been training this leg that intense, the good one, for the past 6 months. So that leg's detrained. And even that, we're still not matching, not exceeding. We're not even matching that level. And so that's the physical strength. So of course they go back and they're I don't know, I don't feel ready. It's you're not. And so then even just from the beginning, how much of the medical community, how much of the stuff you're hearing from your doctor is, you'll never do this again. You'll never do this again. You'll never do this again. There's a good chance you're going to hurt this one or do this. And so that's that's what they're hearing from day one. These are the standards that are being set. And I talked about it on the last podcast. Some of it's out of their hands as well. There's lots of limitations from the medical community and the PTs, what they're able to do, the timelines, the facilities, the resources that they have. So it's not to say that they're bad. It's just that the understanding that level that they get you to is not where you need to be. And so there's a big gap in the space. This is why I do what I do, between people that are in the more medical, physical therapy, like space, a little bit more like conservative, we'll say. And then there's like trainers, performance guys who just like don't want to touch that, leave that alone. And it's the athletes that are falling through the crack, because the issue is that they get left in the worst possible situation. You get almost all the way back where you can kind of play, but you're not yourself again. So like if they just got halfway back and were told you'd never play again, they'd be better off, because you wouldn't hurt yourself again.
Yeah.
But they're getting like, they become just dangerous enough to go and do it all over again. And that's why the re-injury rates are so awful. Like we talked about this, it's complicated of why the injury rates in general are so high. There's so many factors. But I talked about it in the last podcast. Like you can look at different stats depending on where you go. But as a general rule, about 50% of people who ever tear their ACL, like athletes, only half of them will ever make it back to their previous level of sports performance. So if you're a college athlete, only half of you are going to play college again. Some of you might go play rec, intramural, but only half are going to play college again. Of that half, another half are going to re-tear, or injure their other leg within 2 years. So we have 1 in 4 success rate, not failure rate, success rate, that will actually get back to their level of performance and be healthy again, not be injured again. And so that's the stat that I focus on even more so than the injury rate in the first place, is because that's one that we have so much more direct influence over. Of like, you're going to tell me that we're going to go through 6 months, 9 months, 12 months of this agonizing, terrible, boring, demoralizing rehab process. And after all that, you only have a 1 in 4 chance of being successful. Like that's awful. That's not good enough to me. And that's why I do this. And again, it's not to like harp on saying it's this person's fault, it's these people, whatever. Like I'm just saying that's the reality. And so like the reason that I do the stuff that I do is just because of that. Like, and there's direct stuff that we can do. Like, so to counter that, it's like not to be like, I'm the Messiah, I've done all these things, but I've worked with over probably 60 guys at this point. I don't have the exact number. They're coming off of various injuries, ACL, MCL, meniscus. Lots of times it's a combination of that. Lots of time it's their second or third one. I kind of jokingly call the guys that I work with the problem children, because like I've gotten a reputation now where people start to come to me, but before it was like people were only coming to me after they've exhausted everything else. So it's like they've been through the gambit, they've been through all the experts, they've done all these different things. Of those guys that I've worked with, so of those 60, of the ones that have completed the entire thing, that have been able to go through from kind of start to finish, 0 re-injuries to date, like 0. And so it's not to say that that'll never happen, and not to say that once I have one, this whole system is bullshit or whatever. But it's just like compare that to the standards, and it's just like what are we doing? And to be honest, like the stuff that I'm doing is not mind blowing. Like it's almost common sense. Like, and so it's that's the kind of the state of affairs around all of this stuff. That's the thought process and the foundation that I kind of think about. That's why I do all of this. That's the very long-winded answer to getting back to 100% and everything like that. That's where it all goes in my head. And that's just, I kind of put all that together because to me it's all connected. And so that's where like it kind of explains the whole situation. It kind of comes full circle. That's the whole deal.
Yeah, that was good. And to me, this is a very important topic because I think one thing I've come up with, I'm sure there's a technical definition for it in the literature, is that you adopt an injured identity. And I think that's what I've personally struggled with in the past, where you don't do enough physical work to come back beyond 100%, because I think that is important, because if you do come back to just 100%, what's your reference there? You got injured at that 100%, your previous 100%. So now we need to raise what your 100% is. So it's interesting that I think for myself, I haven't put in all of the work, just because sometimes, as you're saying, it depends. Injuries can be so nuanced that a standard protocol might not get you as an individual feeling that physical level of confidence. There's always that little, this doesn't feel right here. And I think ankles are very interesting. They're very subtle and everything depends on it, versus shoulder. Lots of things depend on our shoulder, but you don't stand on your shoulder every day. and there's so many other joints that trickle up from your ankle. Can you talk about the hip complex to ankle relationship? Because I think there's a hip epidemic, I won't even say imbalance, a hip weakness epidemic in the world, because we all sit, especially in the Western world, and I battle that every day. What's your thoughts around that whole dynamic?
So there's definitely issues between hip that contribute a ton to lower back. Okay. I'd say a lot of times the lower back issues stem from like issues with the hip. But what's interesting, so with you mentioned earlier the issue in the ankle because of kind of stuff going on with the hip. I think that relationship's actually flipped. Okay. I think for me, like the ankle, the foot, like that is the foundation that will then affect a lot of stuff upstream. Not that the inverse is not true, but being again like the base level, like the floor, the foundation of the house, like that affects the stuff on top of it more than vice versa. The same way the shoulder doesn't have as big of an effect on the hip as the hip might on the shoulder. If you can't rotate, you're going to overdo whatever. And so that's where like a lot of issues definitely come, and where like that's where the rage with all the stuff around like Barefoot Shoes and all these different things, like there's a lack of function everywhere in terms of lifestyle, performance, everything like that. And so of course, like the foot and ankle is going to be one that gets hit by that as well. And so I think that definitely contributes to a lot of issues with the hip. The most common thing is that people are just extremely tight through the hips, just because of how much we sit all day. That hip flexor is extremely shortened. And that's where just stuff like the ATG split squat, the couch stretch, it's not a catch-all fix everything, but it checks a lot of those bases. And so that's just like a very simple one that can start to get some improvement there. And then also with the low back stuff, like people are just scared to touch it. Like people are scared to train it. Like directly, you're not allowed to bend your spine. Everything has to be perfectly brace neutral all of the time. And so we can get into some specifics if you want to, but I think that's like kind of an overview of that sort of thing. Makes sense. I see you doing some very heavy, seated, what do you call that? Seated good mornings. Yeah, I love those. Those are good. And you do that with very aggressive weight. Talk to us about, first of all, explain that exercise, because I guess not many people do that. What are the benefits of that? Basically, you're sitting on a bench, like you're straddling a bench with a bar on your back, like you were going to squat it, and you kind of hinge forwards. So you're trying to touch the goal is because we're actually trying to maintain extension through the spine, rather than letting it, like the weight wants to round you over, wants to break your posture. So your idea with that movement is to stay extended. And so you can start it with dumbbells, like most people should start it with dumbbells, not with a bar. But that we're trying to touch your belly button to the bench without letting your chest touch. Mm-hmm. So you're folding forward until like your stomach basically touches the bench and comes back up. And so there's a lot of load through the lower back, but also to the glutes. That's actually like most people will struggle with this at first because of the mobility, because there's a big mobility component, a big stretch to the groin through the adductors. And so this one really complements that split squat very well. Like these are the two that I'll prescribe here. Like if your hips are super, super tight, especially as an athlete, loading stuff more than just stretching stuff is very, very effective for improving mobility, creating more of that structural change as opposed to just passive range of motion. But the combo there of like split squat will get a lot of hip flexor, and then good morning gets a lot of groin adductor. And so you get the front to back and the side to side. So just those two as a superset can do a ton of things for kind of hip, low back. And so once you get the mobility to the groin, what will restrict people with the good morning to start off with, more so than just like the strength piece or anything like that. But then as that improves, then you can really start to load this a little bit more, and it can become a strength exercise more than a mobility exercise. And it's awesome for building that low back strength for sure, but also, like I said, really building strength through the glutes. You get such a good hip extension through there that if once you're starting to do it right when your glutes start to feel sore the next day. Like the back actually almost works a little bit more isometrically. Like you won't feel it sore the next day compared to the glutes. I'll feel more muscular work in the glutes. And so a couple of I really like focusing on, as you're going into the bottom, taking your weight to your feet as well. So you almost push you the feet to really drive through the hips on the way back up. And so from like a strength and mobility perspective, does a ton of things for that lower back, but then also from an athletic perspective, again, coming back to that idea of structural balance, that's a range of motion that people almost have never touched before that is very unique to this. There's very few other exercises that will work through that. So if you think the sticking point, where is it the hardest? It's where your torso and your thigh are basically parallel. So they're almost touching. Almost every low back or even just strength exercise you're going to do, it's going to be at 90 degrees. Your legs are here and your torso is parallel to the floor. And so it's that mid-range, but we have so much, so lack of development through that end range down here where they're touching, that you can get. That's one of the cool things with the ATG stuff is you can get so many, even people that are well developed, so many newbie gains through this, because there's just little ranges of motion, little kind of hacks, little spots that you unlock that you just haven't touched before. And so you can develop so quickly. And so that one in particular has big correlation to acceleration, your ability to explode, its ability to start. Because if you think about like the position of a swimmer when they're like on the blocks, or a sprinter coming out of the blocks, or even like, D-linement. Well, think about the position, like how close the torso and the thigh are to each other when you're all wound up, and then your ability to explode out of that. And so it has that 0 to 5 has great carryover to that one from an athletic standpoint. So yeah, tons great for hip, low back stuff, just like health maintenance. And then also that athletic side of things, the ability to explode and accelerate does big things as well.
Well, that's super interesting. So I'm a big, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't think zealot's a word, but I pay very attention to the details. So that's why I enjoyed coaching with you. And I think the more knowledge you have, the more you end up seeing or questioning all these little details. So here's an interesting detail. I noticed when you do seated good mornings, you do a fuck ton of weight, but your mouth is always open on the way up. Tell me about that. Is that just your style of combating how much weight is on your back? Or?
Yeah, not conscious at all. I have noticed that as well. It feels natural, and so I do it. It's like that's okay. It's weirdly almost, it might be a way of like bracing and making pressure actually, even though it's kind of counterintuitive, because it's like this, like it's still like it's tight through when we're coming back out. But yeah, I have noticed that, and I actually get comments on that in almost every video, like, because it's like it's just wide open. It's kind of funny, but yeah, not intentional, just happens on its own. But I do think just to that same point of, I've heard other people, it's not something that I've explored a ton, but people talk about like Kobe and Jordan and that sort of thing. If there's like, they're both
with their tongue, right?
Exactly. And so like, yeah, the posture with the tongue and that sort of thing. And so it's an interesting thing. I've heard some people explore it a little bit, but it's not something I'm quite as well versed in.
Okay. What do you tell yourself? So you recently got, I won't claim injury on you. You recently had a little tweak, right? What do you tell yourself when you first get injured? I think that's a very important component for athletes and anyone who gets injured.
Yeah. So I had a little snowboarding fall, like it was, landed on my shoulder, like separated the joint just like a little bit. First thing, I don't know, like I actually, first like 24 hours, I kind of try not to analyze it too much. Honestly, if anything, I try more to just like feel of like, let's just kind of notice what's going on. Like just try and sit, like let things settle, and then we'll kind of feel it out. And so then the next day went to the ER just because there was one there, got a little x-ray, like nothing's broken. It's just that you got like this little separation here. But then also, so the 2 days after that, I still had 2 more days in the snowboarding trip. So it's like, you should probably let it chill, but at the same time, like we've got a few more days, so we're going to have to like ride that out still. So it was definitely a little bit more conservative, but we were back out on the slopes the next 2 days. So just trying to, I guess with that, it's like not letting it affect what I was going to do. And then just kind of listening, okay, so this is kind of the protocol. You need to let it chill for a few days. But then after that, like just get it moving, get it working. And so then that's kind of the goal or the thought process now, is just like giving it as much of that stimulus again as we can, in as many different ways as possible. Explore what hurts, explore what feels good, explore what feels weak. Try and not aggravate it too much from the pain side of things, and try and hit those things that feel weak as hard as you can until that comes back. It's like range of motion's good, everything like that. It's not quite as strong as the other one just yet. But yeah, just seeing it as an opportunity to improve is a little bit cliche. But there is that element of it, but just thinking of like, okay, like I just need to do as many things as possible until this feels like it should again. Use it as much as I can, as frequently as I can, in as many different ways as I can. It's not something to hurt, like to avoid and not touch, maybe in those beginning stages when it just needs to calm down. But then once you get the green light, the more you need to do as much as possible. The more you do, the better, as long as you're not making things worse. So that, I think, is probably the one thing. That's the kind of guiding principle with all of the injury stuff that we do. Whatever it is, whatever injury that you have, and that's even another thing, is that the diagnosis is something that's really not that important. To me, at least. Like, it's something that tells us some stuff, and like there's maybe some nuance, but like shoulder's a shoulder, a knee's a knee. Like, you need to be able to do these different things, and the body is what's going to heal you. You just need to give it a stimulus to do so. And so using it in as many different ways as we can, as often as we can, at the greatest intensity that we can, without, again, overdoing it, without making things uncomfortable, without making things worse. That's going to be the trick that's going to help whatever injury you have heal faster, come back better.
I like what you said there. The body will heal you. You just need to give it the stimulus that it needs. So I'm going to keep that, because in this interview, silently, I'm picking up things from you to go back and get on the pitch. Get on the pitch, because I do miss it. You know what I mean? And I think the longer that I stay away from the pitch, I think to a degree, the more I lose that sense of identity of an athlete, being able to compete in those, unknown environments. Because it's different to the gym. Like, you go to the gym all day, you do that shit, and you get bored. But coming into a dynamic sport environment versus like a climbing, you just up and down on the wall. But versus like football, there's so many different joints that I think it's one of those complex sports, similar to basketball as well. I think you jump a lot more, and you could definitely fuck up your ankles pretty bad in basketball. I'm excited by this. And you talked about barefoot shoes. So I've fully converted to a degree to many different types of barefoot shoes. What's your take on it? I noticed when I trained with you, you had me train barefoot, and most of your athletes do train bare feet. What's the mindset behind that?
Yeah, definitely, like, getting out of your shoes as often as you can, I think, is something that is very, very valuable. If we think about, like, the feet have close to as many, if not as many, kind of sensors, proprioceptors as our hands. And so we think about, like, the fine motor skills of the hands, how many different things that they can do. Like, just the easiest example is if, like, you wouldn't try and play the piano with oven mitts on, and like just all like something that's just going to cover up and just take away, again, that stimulus. That sensory perception is one of the biggest things in terms of balance, in terms of touch, tactile, feel, all of these different things. And so, not to say that like you should throw your shoes away, but it's definitely something that we should just be mindful of. That connection between the foot and the brain, all of these different things. Like, with our current lifestyle of being in shoes on perfectly flat ground all of the time, I just think the more that we can get out of that, the better, because it's not something that it's not something we're going to overdo in our current like lifestyle. So the more that we can get, the better. I'm a big fan of getting kind of outside and barefoot as well. Again, the grass is something that's massive. You get a little bit of the benefits of grounding. You get some of the sun, slightly more uneven or softer posture, or like terrain, like grounds that you're walking on as well. So the barefoot shoes are great. It's a good place to start, but also just being mindful so like, especially some of like I really like Vivos and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. I've got some of those, or something that I wear a lot. But also just being mindful of the thickness, because like the common adage is that like we're not designed to wear shoes, which is true, but we're also not designed to walk on concrete. So like if you start like throwing off your shoes, like the impact, it can be almost like too much, too intense. So just making sure that the cushion is something that's not horrible, as long as it's not gigantic. But the wide toe box is very big. The zero drop is very big. But yeah, there's tons of benefits from just being barefoot in general. It's something that, again, it's one of those, just like the ATG stuff, it's just low hanging fruit. It's something that most people have done so little that your feet are very underdeveloped. I'm a huge fan, especially before I was in the gym that you and I trained at, when I was training guys out at the park. And so we would do a lot of sprinting barefoot, like long end, like 80 yards, like just open up real top speed stuff. And every time guys would come back like the next couple of days and be like, oh, my feet, like they're so sore. And it's just because it's a different level of stimulus, and it's something that most guys have done very, very little of. And so, yeah, sprinting barefoot in the grass, I think, is awesome. Lifting in barefoot shoes and everything like that's fine. I don't think it's going to give you as much of the stimulus as you think it is, because it's really not that different. And so like you're still flat footed. It's more of stuff that's plyometric, stuff that's bouncy, stuff that's moving, where you can get that stretch reflex with stuff in the foot, or you can get that sensory motor side of things with the foot. Those would be the biggest things. And so yeah, if I had to pick one, either walking daily outside in the grass, I think is massive, or sprinting like once or twice a week out in the grass if you can get barefoot and stuff like that as well. But the more you can do that stuff, the better for sure.
What's your thoughts on the beach? Because I live near the beach and I run on the beach. But what I've noticed is that while the surface is very uneven, I think it also compensates for your own weight distribution. So you don't get the reverse stimulus that you need to react against. Any thoughts on that?
So running on the beach, I don't like sports stuff, like all the cone drills in the sand. Like I love it for the natural element, getting in the water, getting the sun, like all of that good stuff. But yeah, it's too soft, and it will change your biomechanics. And so you'll just tend to collapse at the arch a lot more. You'll pronate way too much. And so yeah, it's definitely not something I would do too much of. If you can get down to like the harder sand, that's better for sure than the soft stuff.
Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's not one that I'm a big fan of because of the way that it'll mess with your foot and ankle and with your biomechanics.
Cool. So you talked the name of the show is Progress Guaranteed, and I'm very interested in. I look at this entire space as we're all exploring, to a degree, the true animal that we actually are now coming into a new environment. So you mentioned grounding. What's your thoughts on grounding? What's been your experiences, and what advice we have for folks on grounding?
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I think the stuff, anything that we can do to get back and kind of reconnect with nature more, whether that's kind of just being outside, whether that's eating kind of real foods, like all of these things I think are infinitely valuable. And the more of that you can do, the better. This podcast was going to be in my backyard with my feet in the grass. I just lost my wired headphones. So I didn't want the neighbors making too much noise or anything like that. But I'll go out there with my laptop, and that's where I'll do work most days when I'm working from home. Again, I think it's something it just logically makes sense, right? We're not meant to be indoors in a box under fluorescent light all the time. And so is it going to you can argue the degree of impact that it's going to have on health, different things like that. But there is there's plenty of science coming out on things like grounding, things like sunlight is very, very big, probably even more than grounding for circadian rhythms. When you talked about sleep and stuff like that, morning sunlight and avoiding nighttime light, like tech in particular, two of the biggest things that you can do for health and for sleep and everything like that. It resets your circadian rhythm, which affects your hormone production, things like melatonin and things like that. Make sure you actually feel sleepy when it's time to go to bed. So that stuff's massive. And what's cool about it too is with all of this stuff, you get kind of compounding benefits. If you get a few things at once, you get grounding, you get sunlight, you get fresh air, all at one time. And so it's one of those things that, yeah, it's just taking your laptop outside to work. If you're working it's one of these things that's, there's science on it for sure. There's the woo-woo side of it of just being in nature, all of these different things. But I definitely think it's something that I try and do a ton myself personally. And even it's something that I'm trying to emphasize more with my athletes as well. So especially for the recovery side of things, you look at it from any side of it, the performance side of things, recovery side of things, but we want to optimize our physiology as best we can. So the environment in here that is us, we want this to be in a healthy state, a state to perform, a state to heal. If we're trying to come back from an injury, we need to heal, recover. We need to be in as optimal a physiological state as we possibly can. If we're inside all day, sitting all day, eating like crap, it's not just that's just going to diminish the effectiveness of all of the training that we do. Mm-hmm. And so that's just if our goal is to speed that up and to be as effective as we can, as come back as fast as we can, whatever it is, perform better, that's only going to be enhanced by all of these things, which are the easiest way to think about it is just that of we're optimizing our physiology. We are putting our body in its most natural state possible so that everything else that we do, whether it's cognitive stuff, literally just working, creativity, athletic stuff, whatever it is, all of that's the rising tide that lifts all ships. All of that stuff is going to be better the more that we have, the more that we're doing those kind of things, basically.
Yep. I see more people exploring rotation now. So I've also been exploring that as well, just as a new, I want to call it a new form of fitness, but my own education in that dimension. What's your thoughts on incorporating rotation into your training? Or have you explored that effectively?
Yeah, I definitely think it's great. I think it's interesting. That's like, it comes from a lot of like the common criticism of, again, coming back to the gym stuff and what is the reason why it's not maybe so ideal for movement quality. It is because it is just so static and sagittal and straight line as opposed to the way that we move, which does definitely have this rotational element to it. The spinal engine stuff from Grakowski, like all of that stuff makes a lot of sense and is very, very interesting. And you do see it show up in nature, in high level athletes, all of these different things. And so I think it's worth dabbling and exploring. And I think there's people doing good stuff in this space. I think as with anything, with like a counter movement, like it definitely probably swings too far of like, they make these criticisms of traditional training, traditional strength training, of all of this stuff. It's unnatural. They never do any rotation. Like it's all terrible. It's only focused on strength and muscle mass and everything like that. So we're going to only do this rotational stuff. And then like you swing too far where you've got guys just like swinging ropes and clubs and like they're all like 150 pounds and like would get run over by an average guy in the NFL. And so it's like it's like they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater of like it seems like you're either in one of these two camps and they're starting to come together just a little bit more. But there's definitely good stuff to be had here. But it's just like becomes its own like identity and fad, just like the stuff over here. So the concepts I like a lot and make a lot of sense to me. The training I'm seeing, I'm less convinced by so far. I'm seeing some guys that do good stuff, but it's one of those that so far, at least, it makes more sense to me in theory rather than application. Again, coming back to the Ben Patrick thing of like, put any of those guys up against him in a sprint, in a dunk contest, anything like that. It's like, and so it's that results side of things. There's some people doing good work here, getting good results, like everything like that, but it still needs more for me to be like totally bought in by it. I need to see more results, more transformations to the same degree that is happening in some of these other spaces, these more traditional methods. And so you have that integration of the two, of the movement quality, the rotational side of things, even the fascial side of things, if we want to get into that, but with the strength and power. You got to have both if we want to be optimal. And there's like, for the most part, there's like a little bit of like ignoring that strength and power side of things, or at least they're not developing it to the same degree. And so that's what I would like to see, a little bit more of that mix of both.
Gotcha. A lot of people are interested in research or what I've noticed. So I don't come from America. So one of the things I've noticed in, I won't even call it, we'd say Western tradition or ideology, is the scientification of the natural world, right? And looking at it from this explainable lens, whereas like if we watch football players who play from Brazil versus the African players, like their ability to move on the pitch just defies like structural science to a degree. So there's an environmental component, there is an emotional component, a cultural component, and all research, as an academic, the traditional publishing process is kind of, there's a game to it as well. But all research, all published research comes from a hypothesis and is proven with a certain set of observations. So with that in mind, what's something that's not proven in literature yet that you're observing or you're curious about trying to prove?
Just to come back to the fascial and the rotational stuff, like that stuff is stuff that's still very new. That is like, there's a lot, it makes a lot of sense. There's not as much hard science around it yet. But again, just coming back to that idea of like yet, or even like some of the ATG stuff, some of the knees over toes stuff, like all of that stuff. A lot of this is kind of cherry picking from history, past training methods, past people that have been successful, and kind of looking at some of the unique things that these people have been doing and trying to piece together some of this stuff. But yeah, it's always recognizing that the research side of things, the research-based stuff is valuable. But again, just like the gym, it's like a tool as well. And so there can be, like you kind of hint at, that in the Western world, the Western side of things, and an over reliance on it to a certain degree, like a lack of ability to, or a fear to like think critically. And to just like, if it's not in like a peer reviewed paper, then that's like, stay away, don't touch it, all of these different things. You're going to get like trolled on the internet. So there is an element to that, and it's like the combination of the two, Western medicine versus Chinese medicine, like the value to both. But yeah, in terms of specific topics, I don't know. That stuff is stuff that I'm interested in, but more of even just that thought process and that philosophy, using that to guide you rather than using that to be the end all be all.
Yep. Gotcha. Yeah, I think for myself, I'd love to. I'm on the experiments for the mental side of things, right? How does an athlete or a person in general just develop mentally, and how that interfaces with the body, recurring thoughts, and all of these different types of things.
That point too, like that's another thing, is just recognizing that there are intangibles. Like there are things that you can't quantify in a laboratory and stuff like that. And so like that doesn't mean that they're not valuable. I think that would probably be one of the criticisms of like mental toughness, will to win, drive. Like it's one of this is like it's situational, it's contextual, it's different from person to person, situation to situation. It's hard, if not impossible, to measure. So we don't measure it, so we don't think about it. And it's one of those things like the expression like what gets measured gets managed, or things like there gets improved, all these different things. And so we have a tendency to overvalue things that we can measure just because we can measure them. And so that's some of the stuff coming back to the strength and conditioning side of things, of like why we can get sucked into the weight room a little bit is because it's very measurable. And so like it gives us a sense of a feeling of control and progress that then, coming back to the playing time thing, of like doesn't always transfer over to the pitch that the way that we want it to, but we can very clearly see increases in weight and size and muscle mass and body composition, all these different things, and speed and power that we can quantify. But again, recognizing that there's always this element of like creativity within the game of football, like fluidity, skill, like all of these different things that are much harder to quantify, but doesn't mean they are not important. And so that's just one of the pieces with that.
Do you have fun when you're training? I don't typically have fun. So I'm searching for that.
It depends for sure. I think the most fun and the best training sessions are typically like group sessions, like when you talk about that environment and stuff like that. I would say some of the solo sessions that I have aren't necessarily as fun. It's more like I'll come at it more from a place of curiosity or growth or exploration or things like that, or even like competition, to like compete with myself, compete with past numbers. But one of the things that's the like strength and conditioning world probably does very well that they don't get enough credit for is that like that environment, that culture piece, and just like the ability to get a group of guys together and get them to compete and push themselves and grow. Like that's the sort of thing that they don't get enough credit for, that they'll just get hammered on by they'll just get hammered on their training methodologies by the counterculture space and people outside of that. But then, their training sessions look like they're boring. People are barely breaking a sweat, like all that. And so it's just the two different worlds, I guess. But that is, I think, the sessions that I've seen to be the most fun, also the most productive as well. That was one of the things that, coming back to like Ben and the knees over toes guy, was so interesting when I first went there and saw him training guys in the gym. He had a group of guys, like younger, like basketball guys, that all trained together in the gym, were working hard, getting stronger, all of these different things, improving. And then they also all got together once or twice a week and played like pickup basketball. And it was like competitive, like 1v1s, like king of the court to like 50, and then like hardcore, like full court 5-a-side. Like it was a real like energy and atmosphere and environment around that I definitely think contributed to the results that they got. And again, that's one of those intangibles that's harder to measure and gets overlooked some. But that environment piece is usually what I would say has the biggest contributor to how much fun you're having in the weight room.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. As a data scientist, I've been very curious about all of these intangible factors. And I hope that more coaches like yourself, when I say at your level, meaning within your scope, right? So you're not part of the the big box, you're an independent, you're pushing the boundaries, you're getting results. It'd be interesting to measure like, hey, did you masturbate or ejaculate the night before, right? Number of sleep. What was your self-talk like that morning? What was your self-talk like before your game? Did you have a scare in that game? All of these little things. Are you playing someone that you think that's much better than you? All of these little nuance factors. I think there's an opportunity in the space of fitness or human movement to define more variables with which to categorize people. Like what's the ethnicity, bone density, like so much weird things. Like, for instance, I don't like to lift as heavy in squats because I've just never felt like my frame, I've done the CrossFit, my body just doesn't care to lift insanely heavy weight. And I think that's also conditioned on me getting long-term injuries, like 3 or 4 years in excruciating shoulder pain. So I'm also very cautious. So it's interesting in my own journey, observing why I don't do certain things and looking deeper into those factors. I think there's an interesting opportunity for coaches to define a new level in the field and to publish their own independent studies outside of the big box entities.
Yeah, and like you said, it's just that expanding into some of like starting to quantify some of those like intangibles that haven't traditionally, and seeing if we can draw some better conclusions for that. That's definitely super interesting. So I'd be curious to hear how that gets on. Yeah.
Okay, so we're calling this thing progress guaranteed. How do you define success and how do you measure progress?
I think you'd have to, so in what domain? Because I think there's like, you have to,
this is just you, like I want to get to know you. Like how are you charting this thing called life? Okay. And what do you define as success? Because I think something that gets pushed on us is go become a billionaire. That's success. And then you're out of shape, et cetera, et cetera. What's your definition of success?
I would say success actually ties into the second part. I would say success is mostly related to progress in a chosen field, a sense that I'm acting. It feels very, to me at least, when I have much greater, not self-worth, but when I'm just happy with myself versus when I think I'm being a piece of shit. It's usually when I have a sense of progress towards something, of like just knowing like I'm doing something to the best or near the best of my ability, to feeling like I am kind of growing, I think is that thing. It's really, that's the biggest one. And you can pick any of your different fields you want. That's what's kind of cool about it. If you can take away some of the pressure of like that outcome based thing that you're talking about and flip it to just that piece. There's 100 different domains I could pick from. It could be like my weight, my fitness, my business, my social media, all of these different things, but just feeling like I'm doing something, I'm working towards something. That's probably the biggest, or like the single biggest thing around that.
That's a super interesting definition. So what rituals or habits do you practice to make sure that you continue to make progress? You could choose a domain if that helps.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing with anything for me, at least, is just trying to be consistent. Okay. That's what I think has been the biggest thing that has helped me throughout my entire life in every domain. Is like, even when I maybe haven't been worked to the same intensity as other people, I've always been very, very consistent. When I was a footballer growing up, trying to make it into college, like just always doing stuff, always playing. And like, I think I remember throwing up from training like twice in my entire career. So it's like not of like just going and busting a gut and absolutely killing myself, but just continuing to show up, kind of day in and day out. And same thing from now, like a business and a training perspective and stuff, like just continually trying to find new things. And so almost that idea of like the Atomic Habits book of like, what's the smallest thing that you can start, but then start to do consistently. Because I think where I've fallen into traps before, and potentially other people do as well, is that roller coaster of kind of intensity and slack, where like, fuck, I'm not doing enough. I got to do more. Just do everything. I'm going to have the perfectly outlined day. And then a week in, I'm like, fuck, I'm dead. I hate this. None of this matters. And then you slide. And you're doing, and you've let go of everything. I'm watching 2 hours of Netflix. I'm playing video games. I'm eating like shit, all of that stuff. You do that for a week and you're like, God damn it, I'm a piece of shit. And then you snap the whip and then you come up. And so just what's the smallest thing that you can start doing and start doing that consistently? And then just like again, trying to make the smallest incremental improvements you possibly can, but the ones that you can stick to. Because that, I think, is when I've been the most productive and the most even fulfilled too. Mm-hmm. It's not when I'm doing 18,000 different things a day. It's when I'm like, okay, like I know I did something good today. I know I did what I thought I was going to do, what I said I was going to do. Like keeping your own promises, that's a big one. But part of keeping your own promises is not promising yourself you're going to do something insane. So like doing like that manageability piece, and then like being able to actually stick with that combination is, I think, what's been I've felt the most self-worth and like the best about myself, the most, but like I'm progressing, all of those good things.
Beautiful. What's your self-talk like when you're not making progress? Like, do you beat yourself up? Or you talk kind of to yourself?
Oh, yeah. I'm my worst critic for sure. We were like 12 rounds in the boxing ring. Like, we're just beating the shit out of myself. Like, it's It's definitely much worse than it probably could be. And if we were being the most healthy person that we possibly could.
This is also very interesting. Just to see how different people mentally coach themselves. Right, and how they respond to like the military style, you're a piece of shit, versus, all right, you made a mistake, you can do it. Yeah.
And so, I do that a lot unwillingly. Like I don't respond well to that, but it's just what happens anyway. It's not like it's a productive way of like whipping me back into shape.
Okay.
And so that's where like has tended to be the most successful for me is recognizing, trying to be a little bit more accepting as well. And not feeling like I then have to compensate and bounce back. And that's where I just keep coming back to that, having smaller adjustments or like smaller corrections rather than like, even if you think about just like a plane trying to fly a long distance and stuff like that, if you're constantly all over the place, like you're going to be all over the map, and just recognizing, okay, you're over here, let's just start to come back. And just being a little bit more like accepting, a little bit more tolerant, and not thinking I have to kind of uproot and change my entire life and do all of these different things in order to get back on track. That's been much more helpful for me.
Gotcha. Yeah, one thing that I found that worked for me when I was almost over a decade is replacement or brainwashing. So I would record what I want my mental thoughts to be, and I'll just drown it with reps. I'd listen to this thing for like 10 hours straight on repeat. It sounds like shit, whatever, but my brain is going to accept it at some point. And so that's my hypothesis that I'm testing with different people. And there's a very interesting difference in how you get motivated by hearing other people motivate you versus hearing yourself tell you how you should be. A lot of different guilts that come up different times of the day. So I just share that with you, as a data point. Okay.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
So you're a freak athlete. Right, so freak athletes make shit look easy, okay? But what are two things that you tell yourself when you want to quit?
Usually the biggest one is just trying to reconnect with why I'm doing it in the first place. Because at least for me, the most common voice that comes up whenever I don't want to do anything hard, whether it's wake up in the morning, whether it's take the goddamn cold shower, whether it's like a hard workout in the gym, like the voice for me, the criticism always tries to diminish its value. I'm like, it doesn't actually matter that much. It's not actually that important. It's like, it's not going to help you do whatever. Like, it's not a big deal. That's always, at least for me, that's always like my out from that, like kind of just the Joe Rogan mental bitch side of things. Like that voice, that's always where it goes. It tries to make it seem less significant. And so then the opposite of that, of trying to reconnect with that purpose of why I'm doing why I'm doing whatever it is that I'm doing, that's usually the most helpful thing for me. It's like, okay, yep, come on. And then also, if anything, almost trying to diminish or trying to relax almost of if there's this thing that is hard, a lot of times, not only am I trying to mentally diminish the value of it or the significance of it, but in my mind, I'm also playing up the difficulty of it as well. Like, it's this giant thing for this little reward. And so just like kind of taking your breath of like, there's a reason you're doing this, and it's really not that, like, it's not that bad. Just like being a little bit calmer, like of all of that stuff. And just like when you're in the moment, it seems like this gigantic thing. And then literally 5 minutes later, you're like, all right. And so just starting to recognize that bit of like, yeah, just trying to recognize the truth of the matter of it's not as big, it's not as cruel, or it's not as horrible as I'm making it out to be. And it does actually have some worth that you've decided previously when you weren't like in the middle of it. And so kind of trying to remember that as well.
That over amplification of that difficulty, is that a CNS response that happens when a certain stimulus hits your body?
Probably. Like it's just that like that overwhelmed feeling and stuff like that. Like maybe I'm feeling a little bit tired when I'm like at my laptop or doing some work and stuff like that. Oh my God, I'm so fatigued. I'm so tired. I should do whatever. I should take a break. I should take a nap. So, and then like you just keep going for 5 minutes. And you're like, yeah, you're actually okay. And it's just, I really like the Jocko Willing thing where he's talked about taking the next day. It's like if you wake up in the morning, you're like, God, I just feel like shit. I'm so tired. All of this stuff. Like I genuinely feel like I need a break. He was like, take that break the next day. It's because it's like when you're in the moment, a lot of times it is just that voice. And so if you get up and get through it, then all of a sudden you realize like, oh, you're not actually that bad. And so it's just the idea of not like caving to that weaker, not self, but like that inner weakness. Just like giving up to that, like not caving to that in the moment. And then if you do genuinely need a rest day, just take it tomorrow. Yeah, you'll be good to go. I like that idea of like, if you're deciding that you don't want to do something because it's hard in the moment, that's usually a bad reason. 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, it's a bad reason to quit, and you're going to feel like shit about it later.
It's a good one. Do you nap?
Yeah, inconsistently, but yes. Usually short ones, like 10, 12, stuff like that.
Yeah, I notice Americans have a hard time napping. Like I'm from the Caribbean, I nap like that. Like
really?
Oh yeah.
How do you do it normally?
Dude, you give me 5 minutes on the ground, I wake up refreshed. It doesn't matter. Like I'll literally go into dream states within about 2 or 3 minutes instantly.
Wow.
So that's just an island thing, I think. I might have some chemical issues maybe. I think I have low iron sometimes, so I do sort of get that fatigue.
Well, I think that's more common in other parts of the world. Like even in like Europe and stuff like that, they have it's not like the siesta. I guess the siesta is more like
siesta. That's a Spain thing. But dude, throughout the Caribbean, like I grew up seeing my grandfather eat lunch, take a nap after like for years. So that's programmed into my brain.
Yeah. It's just like it's that the toxic side of that like hustle culture of like, oh, you're napping or like sleeps for the week, all this stuff. So
yeah, Tim Ferriss kind of opened my eyes to like, how all the different experiments that he did was like taking small naps versus the big chunks. I noticed you eat really clean to a degree. So you eat like really good milk, really good meat. Talk to us about what led you down that path.
Yeah, so I'm definitely a big fan of the more like kind of animal-based style nutrition. So like not like full-on carnivore, that sort of thing, but just having that as like the kind of foundation. But I do think that whatever style you're eating, like carnivore, vegan, vegetarian, pescatarian, like I do think we undervalue the quality of food. And just nowadays, I think it's a little bit of a fad, but it's also more important than ever just because of how processed and refined and essentially shitty everything is, that it becomes that much more important to like, it really does matter from a nutritional point of view, of just the stuff that you're putting in your body. Like it's people always get hung up over the expense, and it is a little bit more expensive. It's really like the way that I eat's really not that bad. But it's also, there was a stat that I heard that's, I don't know if the exact numbers are accurate, but it's like back in the 70s or the 80s, maybe even earlier than that, a family's nutrition budget was like 30% of their income or 20% of their income. It was a very high number. Their medical budget was like 3 or like 4 or 5.
Wow.
And so now it's like flipped of like, so it's the same amount of money, spending it in a different place. Like now we spend little on food and a ton on healthcare. And you could make the argument like the same money, but like quality of life and all these different things. So to me, that is one of the most important places I could spend my money. So I definitely just think about it more as like a priority. You could even think about it as an investment of like, if you are the magic maker, the rainmaker, and whatever field, whatever it is that you do, it's just coming back to that optimizing your physiology idea of like, there's going to be nothing that you can do that is going to be more even make sense monetarily than investing in yourself. Like Alex Hormozy has like the S&P 500 idea when he talks about like learning, instead of like investing in the stock market, so instead of investing in the S&P, you invest in like the S&P. It's like learning skills, because of how much more valuable that is. Of like, you learn how to sell and you can make infinitely more money than the 10% return you can make in the stock market. And so like same kind of idea of like that same concept just applied to health. And yeah, it's just thinking of how important it is. Like, it's just something that makes all the sense in the world to me, and to not do, honestly, I think is head scratching. I'll put it like that.
Yeah. Are you a super clean eater, or you eat some shit?
For the most part, I'm pretty, I cook the majority of my meals. Really try and focus on like grass-fed beef, pasture-raised eggs, organic produce. I know organic doesn't make the biggest difference in the world these days. But that, when I say quality, that's usually what I mean, of like eating like real food and like being very aware of the sourcing of it. So there's a very good book called Anti-Factory Farm. That's really, it's very short, and it's really more of a like checklist or like a catalog rather than like an actual book. But it basically explains like what all of the labels in the grocery store mean. Because nowadays we have so many different kind of labels that all are just really just trying to branding just to make you think that it means something, and which ones actually mean stuff and which ones mean next to nothing. And so like eggs are the easiest one. You've got like the store bought, you've got the cage free, you've got the free range, and then you've got the pasture raised. And if you go into that like store bought, there's very, very little difference between free range, cage free, and just like traditional like store bought. Like, they're all kind of terrible from an ethical standpoint, from a nutritional standpoint, but one's like, that means pasture raised. That's like the difference in what that actually means in terms of how the chickens are raised and stuff like that makes a huge difference. And so it's just those little nuances like that most of us don't really know about. It's just a very quick guide or an easy explanation of how to decipher all of that stuff. So that's one that I recommend a lot.
Oh yeah. Have you seen some of the videos where you'll have fake food, like sponge food? So someone will cut a piece of fish and it looks like a piece of fish, but it's really like a sponge that you're eating, and like it cooks the same. There's crazy stuff with like fake eggs and now and then dyeing food. So I like, chemical engineering is my background, so I'm super fascinated with like how you can fake things. I don't know, I go down different rabbit holes, so that gets interesting sometimes.
I'm definitely trying to go down that rabbit hole with all the fake meat and all of that stuff, but I'll stay away from that as long as I can.
All right. So the last couple of questions. What's your career optimization function? So is it finances, work-life balance? Is it freedom? What is it for you? How have you chosen to architect your quote unquote career?
I'd say it's probably a little bit more balanced of like, I don't know. I do work a lot. And I guess I would say people that would know me say that I work quite a bit.
Are you a workaholic?
No, definitely not to that same, like, I'm very mindful about, like, again, it's like I'm consistent, but I wouldn't say I'm like all in, intense, hardcore. This is all I do. Like, don't talk to me. So it's like, I think I'm focused more than I am intense. At this stage, like, I am very, like, I would say I'm putting extra in towards building the business, towards building financial freedom. Like, it does feel like I'm still in that, being younger, like those younger years, it's like that investment stage, right? Where I'm just investing the time into learning, into production, everything, like, to get to a point where that then gives me a little bit more like freedom of opportunity kind of later on, and still feeling like in that growth stage where like the more you put in now, like, you get exponential returns down the road. But even with that, like, again, I wouldn't say I'm like super 100%, like that's all I do. Like, I am still very mindful of like lifestyle more than anything. Like, I don't need to go and like party and do all these things all the time, but just like optimizing lifestyle, honestly, from like that physiology standpoint. So like as soon as we're done out here, like literally the sun just came out, like I'm going out back. We're going to get some sun, like we're going to do everything like that. And so it's more from that standpoint. I'm moving to Colorado in like 2 weeks. And a big part of that, my brother and I are going, like, going to teach his ass to snowboard. And so we're going to do like stuff like that. So I like to have both, but that's probably my biggest thing. Like I do feel like even right now I'm close to not a tipping point, but whatever that's kind of like a tipping point business wise of like, it feels like things are on the verge of kind of growing. Like I made a lot of progress, gotten a lot of traction, like had a lot of big athletes, big people who like follow me and are interested in me. So if I keep doing the things that I'm doing for X amount of time, that things are going to kind of grow to a new level very soon. And with everything in life, with performance stuff, with business stuff, with all these different things, I feel like there's levels, and it takes a lot of work and time and energy to hit a certain level. But then once you do, it's much easier to maintain. And then to go to the next level is you got to work. And then it's kind of that maintenance thing. And I think a lot of people will work and stop before they hit that next level. And so they fall back down to the next one. And so I think about that. The easiest way to think about that is with like fitness stuff and with business stuff, of like compared to somebody who's like how easy it is for me to maintain a reasonably healthy physique and athletic performance standpoint, to maintain where I'm at. Very, very, very easy. Doesn't take that much work. To hit the next level would be, especially athletically, it'd be very, very hard. It would take like a lot of work, a lot of time, like a lot of focus. But from people who's much below where I'm at to get to where I'm at, takes a lot of work. But again, it's just like, once you hit that threshold, it's much easier to stay there. And so I'm getting close, I feel like, to hitting that next one in terms of like business and financial stuff. So I'm willing to kind of continue to do the extra things to get there. And then once you get there, reevaluate, can do all sorts of things. But yeah, it feels like we're close to that. So that's the biggest priority for me at the moment.
I'm very excited for you. I studied your progress, I think, over the years. I knew you from school as well. So I knew Zak before he became Zak, and before he will become the Zak in the world. And I think in training with you, you are already at that point. I think the marketplace just hasn't accepted it and applauded it yet, to be honest. I just want to remind you, like, as a coach, like I was a coach as well. So I specifically dissect coaches on how well their attention to detail is, how well they drive a client to push themselves in that client's own uniqueness. And I think you have that intensity and commitment to excellence that I have no doubt you'll achieve all the cool shit that you want to achieve. So I'm very excited.
Thank you, dear. Very much appreciate that. It means a lot.
For sure. Okay. So any books you recommend folks read? Are you a big reader, by the way?
Not as much as I would like to be. So okay. It's weird. I think I have the bad habit of that like productivity, like consumption thing. Like I've got a whole bookshelf of books that I've consumed cover to cover that I could probably tell you one sentence from each one. So it's one of those like, and if like on like it almost comes back to me to like school. Like I'm good if you put me on a multiple choice test where like I can see it, I can like recognize it, but just pure recall of like, tell me what this book means, like actually like really absorbing it and understanding it, not to the same degree. And so I think that's, I have a bad habit of that. And it's like the adage of like, it's better to read 5 good books 10 times than it is to read like 100 books once. And I'm working on getting to that category. I've traditionally been to that 100 books a single time. One that I'm reading right now that I've had recommended a lot that I do like is the Atomic Habits one. Okay. Because that idea, there's something that I even just touched on in here. I think that's one that's really, really big. Mastery by, who's Mastery by?
That's Robert Greene. I think
Robert Greene. Yes. Thank you. That's one that I've always stuck out to me too. That one just really resonated, especially like the age that I was and when I read that, I felt like I was in the middle of that. And so those like developments, like that idea of just the concept of like a mastery of like a craft or a profession, that entire like that approach to business and to life and to career, I think is it's something that resonates with me a lot, that I like a lot more than the idea of like having a job or having a career, but like having a craft, just that word is something that I like a lot. Those are the first two that come to mind. I like those two a lot.
Very cool. what's one piece of advice you have for a high schooler, a college student, and a professional in that order?
In athletic, like to be in athletics, or just
sure.
in life?
Let's go athletics and then go live. That's all good.
The athletics, to all of them, but especially the high schooler, to focus on to play your sport more as much as possible, to think about it like we just talked about, like a craft.
Mm-hmm.
Like the reason that I think I went as far as I did as an athlete and probably like overachieved compared to what I maybe should have as an athlete is that it's not that I trained all the time, it's that I played all the time. I played with my team, I played with the older team, I played pickup with some college guys on the weekend. It was always, and it was, for footballers specifically, it was a lot of small-sided, it was a lot of possession, it was a lot of small goals, like it wasn't a lot of like training. And so I think that is very, very valuable when you're developing, to like play as much as you can in as many different environments as you can, like specifically like small-sided stuff is in particular. Our director for our club was from Trinidad, played with the national teams. Like we had that culture, that influence a little bit more. And that was a very big influence on me. And definitely one of the ways that has shaped how I look at the game. I would say that to the college athlete too. It's just a little bit harder. Your life is so regimented at that point. And like in the football world, at least like the soccer world, there's so little opportunities to actually do that outside of your stuff. Like you have this very intense, very short season, and then like 6 to 8 months of this like weird limbo where like it's a competitive season. You have a game here and there. It's a lot of like strength and conditioning, like all of these different things. So doing your best to still create that environment, or to find that, or to create that with your boys, with your team, that I think would be something that would be immensely valuable. With the professional guy, at that stage, honestly, more of the ATG type stuff, to maximize your health and performance potential, basically. Of like, so just like staying out there on the pitch, and removing some of those inhibitions to allow you to express yourself to your greatest degree, especially with some of the training that goes on that level, like sneaking in some of this stuff as much as you can. That would be probably the biggest one. For the life stuff, the thing that has served me the best is really just continuing to show up. And so that's idea from like a playing, but that's like what that playing perspective for like the high school and college guy. Like I just kept showing up to different things. And if you just show up enough, like you're going to get halfway good at it. And then even when I transitioned then into the coaching world, the strength and conditioning world, I've interned at probably 5 or 6 different places, like all this stuff for free, like just as any time, like being around the environment that you want to be in, the people that you want to be like, the skill that you want to develop, beg, borrow, steal, give away your time for free, like shadow, learn, like as much of that as you can. You're going to get 10 times more out of the environment than you will out of the learning. Like I've got a bachelor's and a master's degree, and I would say that contributes to 1% of my like actual kind of knowledge, experience, like use. Like it's just it looks nice for people on the wall. That's what it's good for more than anything else. Being in those environments, being around the people that you want to be like, and even if they're far away, like we have social media and stuff like that now. So then doing everything you can to study those people, that would be my biggest thing.
That's solid, man. Okay, last 2 questions. So you're stuck on an island with a specialized chef. He could cook anything. Okay, but you only get 2 meals and you're stuck on this island. What 2 meals would you choose? Anything that you want.
Oh, there's steak in there for sure. That's not even a doubt. I'm going to go steak and eggs, 1 meal, steak and salmon, the next meal. Maybe some sweet potatoes.
Steak and salmon?
For sure.
Interesting.
Little surf and turf. It doesn't get any better. We could throw in some sweet potatoes and some fruits. I do love, like I'm a fiend for like berries and fruit and stuff like that. So some strawberries, some blackberries, and then gotta have some raw milk to wash it down.
Oh yeah. I saw your post on the raw milk the other day. So I'm like, I need to get into that. Okay, isn't it? Last interesting question. What do you want people to remember about you? This doesn't have to be, you need to be famous or anything, but just, folks who you've come in contact with.
It's funny. It feels weird to like think about or reflect on like a question like that as being so young. It feels like an old person question, but it's something that's good to think about, because it's something that shapes how you show up in the world, like character and things like that. I think it's more of like a compliment that you don't hear nowadays anywhere. It's a little bit older, but just the idea of, if you ask like your parents about somebody that they knew and they say like, oh, he's genuinely like a good person, a good man. Like it's like as simple as that is. And maybe like it's lost some of the meaning that it has today, but that's like, I love that Lynyrd Skynyrd song of like being like a simple man. Like that's just, it's that like kind of classic like American male like role model of a dude. It's like he's very like
strong and regimented almost, right?
Yeah, you know what you're gonna get. But he's very consistent. He continues to show up. He like provides for the people that he cares about. It's like he's a respected guy throughout like even by like friends and enemies kind of thing, of like that sort of thing. That's something that's an idea that I like a lot, that I'm fairly happy with, like live up to a certain degree.
That was beautiful, man. Well, I wanted to, officially thank you for spending the time. As I reflect on what a podcast means, I think in the game we get distracted by the numbers. Oh, is this gonna have a certain amount of views? Blah 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 blah. But I've switched to measuring. Did Zak enjoy the interview, or did I get to showcase who Zak was, how the trajectory that he's on, and one day when you pass and all of your family takes in this interview, would they remember, hey, he was a good dude? So I thank you for the time that you spent today. I appreciate you coming on.
It's been my pleasure, dude. I appreciate you reaching out. I think that's a much better, more wholesome, more fulfilling way to think about this endeavor in general. So yeah, I appreciate taking the time, the interest to learn and ask about all the stuff that I do, and it's been my pleasure, man. So I appreciate you.
Fantastic.